This is Audio Bird. We're going to show you another video on how to build a pair of these tower speakers. This particular set of towers uses two 4-inch woofers and a 1/2-inch dome tweeter. And as you can see, they are nice, slim. They take up very little of a footprint. You can see our port on the bottom. If you go around to the back side here, you can see our connection cup here on the bottom, and notice this little handle. This is kind of handy for when you want to carry the speaker. You put one hand there and the other one near the top. In the front you can lift it up and carry it around rather easily using one of these little window handles. The box is made completely out of pine, but you can make it out of any material you'd like. If you want to use hardwood or if you want to use fiberboard, you can do that. But we're going to start the video as it goes along. The first thing you're going to see is a drawing of the system. This will give you an idea of how to put it together. What I want you to do is to pause the video and hit your Alt Print Screen key. Then you can print the drawing out and have that as a reference. So let's get going with our video today on how to build a pair of these tower speakers utilizing these little 4-inch woofers. Okay, before we build our tower speaker, let's talk about the drivers or speakers that we're going to use in the system. We're going to use two of these woofers from Parts Express. This particular model has a cast metal frame, square with a square bezel, which is kind of unusual. It's actually Canadian made, I understand. And it has a built-in foam gasket around the outside, and it has a large neodymium magnet assembly. With a heat sink on the back of it, so it can handle quite a lot of power. We're going to use two of these. These are 4-ohm speakers. We'll be using two of these in series. They have about an 80 hertz resonant frequency, and it's going to match our enclosure pretty well. I've tuned the enclosure lower than 80 hertz deliberately because this is a high QTS speaker, so we may be able to get another octave or so out of it. Now, you can also use a speaker of this kind. This is another one from Parts Express. This is a neodymium based, has a big neodymium magnet on the back, a little bit different construction. It has an aluminum cone, whereas the other speaker has a poly cone made out of plastic. This is also an excellent speaker. It has a resonant frequency of 55 hertz, which would also match our enclosure very well. The part numbers for these should be appearing at the bottom of your screen as we go along here. Now, our third speaker we're going to be using is our 3/8-inch tweeter. This tweeter is also a Parts Express item. It has a fairly good sized magnet for a tweeter on it. For the amount of power we're going to be handling with this system, this is going to be more than adequate. This is an 8-ohm speaker, and that's why we'll be running our two woofers in series to give us an 8-ohm matching impedance for the tweeter. Well, these are the drivers we're going to be using, and I think you'll find that they give us some pretty excellent sound once we get the system constructed. All right, here's the parts we're going to need to build our tower speaker. If you'll see my little pointer here, I'll try to point them out as we go along. Now, I've pre-cut all these parts for us, so we're ready to roll. This is a piece of 1x8 lumber, 48 inches long, which is actually 7¼ inches wide in the normal American sizing. We have two of those. Over here on the right hand side is the other side. The speaker baffle itself is a piece of 1x6, which is actually 5½ inches wide, and we have our speaker holes already cut out. These actually are 3 3/4 inch holes, and this is a 2-inch hole here for the tweeter. This is our back, again a piece of 1x6, 48 inches long. Here's the rest of the parts we've constructed. This is the duct that goes inside of the enclosure. It's actually a piece of the 5½ inch material ripped down to 4 inches wide to fit inside of the enclosure in this area here. Over here on the left we have our base, our top, and our bottom. Now notice the base and the top have been chamfered off with what we call an OG bit to make it look a little more attractive. We've done the same thing on the edges of the front of the baffle here on the front panel of the speaker. Well, this is what we're going to use to build our speaker, and in a few minutes we'll show you how we put all these parts together. Before we get started nailing our enclosure together, I want to show you some of the things that I've done ahead of time here. We're going to have to line the enclosure with this indoor-outdoor carpeting, and here's a sample of it that I bought. I bought a piece of this about 8 foot wide by about 10 foot. I think it was around $17. It's 1/4 of an inch thick, and it makes a very nice sound deadener that we have to use inside the enclosure to prevent it from generating any harmonics that we don't want. And I've already pre-glued and pre-stapled these to the front and to the back. And what I'm using is Eileen's tacky glue that you can get at your craft store. It works very good. It's non-toxic glue. It dries pretty quick, and it really holds this material down well on the wood. So we're going to show you as we assemble this unit how we line the tunnel and the inside of the sides as we go along. Okay, we're going to attach our front baffle to the first side section, which would be this one here that we're going to first attach to. And I've got the other one kind of propped up with a C-clamps to hold it up so we can place the front baffle on the other side, and it'll hold it up for us. Now, one thing I wanted you to notice that I've done here on the baffle, I have pre-drilled 3 16th of an inch holes all the way down through here, 1/16 of an inch, in order to keep our nails from splitting the pine. If you do that, you'll have a very excellent joint when you're done. We're going to spread some glue on this portion of the side. Then we're going to attach the first one and nail it on. Okay, I've applied our glue along the edge. And what I normally do, I take a popsicle stick and I spread it out. Thin it out so that it'll cover the edge very nicely and get down into the cells of the wood, so that when we go to attach it together we have a very solid connection. Again, be careful you don't get too much on it running out of the sides. Otherwise you'll wind up with something the stain will adhere to. Okay, we're ready to do this now. Very carefully we're going to take our top, place it on the board, and we're going to make sure that it's extremely level right up here at the very top, that it matches up perfectly with the top and on the side. And we're going to drive our first nail in. And then we'll go ahead and do the bottom. Get the bottom in first. Then we'll work about correcting. By the way, this camera has an AGC system in it, so when you make a lot of noise, it cuts the sound down. I don't recommend that. If you buy one of these cameras, make sure it doesn't have that, because it makes it very difficult, especially if you want to record airplanes, trains, and automobiles rushing by. Okay, we'll put our next nail in the bottom, and then we'll go on down, do all the sides, and get it solidly put together. We got our nails in on our first section of the front panel here. One thing I always do, I take a nail set like this, and I set the nails about 1/8 of an inch in, and I fill them with wood filler. This gives us a good solid, a very solid cabinet when we're done. So get yourself one of these nail sets if you don't have one. Okay, having our side now nailed onto our front panel, we're going to take our caulking gun, some ordinary household caulk, and we're going to run it down the side of this seam down through here in order to seal up this portion of the system. You want to run it all the way down, get the cracks sealed up pretty good. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side when we get the other side installed. I might take my finger here and run down through here and smooth some of this out. And I'm going to remove some of that excess caulk because we're going to have to put our carpeting on there. Here's our duct, how it's going to be installed in the enclosure. I've already got the carpeting stapled to it, as you can see on both sides. And what I've done, if you'll notice, I took my pencil and went around the outside of it. So now I know where I have to put the carpeting on this side. So we'll slice up some of that carpeting with a carton knife, and we'll glue it and staple it down here. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side, and we'll be ready to go with the rest of the assembly. We now have our carpet stapled and glued to both sides, and we're ready to install our duct. We have it in place now. How we'll do this is we'll attach it to the front panel first with about 3 nails, and then we'll nail it, turn it over and nail the side in. Of course, we'll put glue on that side that we're going to be nailing in. Then we'll also take our caulking gun and we'll go around all of the inside of the duct so we can have a good solid seal, air seal there. So let's get started on that, and then we'll put the other side on. Alright, we've got both of our sides now on our enclosure. Our next step is to stuff the tunnel. Now the tunnel has 2 sections. It has this very narrow section here. This is your port that goes to the outside. We're not going to stuff it, but we are going to stuff the larger part of the tunnel down here. We're going to use this polyester stuffing that you can get at your local craft store. They use it for pillows and so forth. I've got about 3 ounces of it here. And you want to take your hand and place it down inside the box all the way to the bottom. Now you don't want to compress it if you can help it. You want to keep it pretty loose in there. If you compress it, it loses its effectiveness of dampening down some of the odd harmonics that we want to avoid with the system. So we keep putting it in a little bit at a time here. And keep going until it's just about at the top where you see it right there. Now if we wanted to be careful with it, we could put a piece of staple a piece of some of this fiberglass screen wire, if you'd like, across here, and this will help keep it into its proper area in case the thing gets turned upside down for some reason. But it's going to be turned upside down when you put the bottom on it anyway. So that's how you stuff the tunnel. The next step is going to be to put the back on, but before we put the back on, we're going to talk about the crossover network and pre-wiring the speaker. Alright, now we're going to talk about our crossover network. Here it is. It consists of a 4 microfarad capacitor and a 0.212 millihenry coil. Now the coil I wound myself. Now you can buy these coils ready-made from Parts Express as well as the capacitors, but the coil I chose to wind myself. What I do is I get excess copper wire from a local guy that rewinds motors. He gives me the end rolls that he can't use. So it makes a nice way to do your own coils. I've got it mounted on a little block of wood here, 3/4 inch piece of block of wood, exactly wide enough to fit in the center of the back, and I'll show you where it's going to be mounted. I've measured down to this point at 22 inches from the top. That's the center of the lower woofer. I want to mount it right like this, just behind that lower woofer, because in case I ever have to service it for some reason, I can get my hand down in there, take the screws out and get it up so I can service it, and I'll leave enough wire when I wire it in so we can do that. So it's going to be mounted just in this position on the back, and we'll do that in a few minutes, and then we'll start wiring. We're going to pre-wire the input from the input hole down here up to the input terminals, and we're going to pre-wire the woofer and the tweeter wires so that when we put the back on, everything's ready to go. All we have to do is then just wire up the speakers. Okay, we have our crossover network mounted. We used a couple of 1 1/4 drywall screws here and here to hold it. Now, this indicator mark here shows me that I'll be right in the center of the speaker, so I can get a screwdriver down in there and take these out if I have to service them ever. Here's our woofer coil, and we've pre-wired it with red wire to this will go to the positive terminal of the woofers, and our negative wire, our black wire, and our yellow wire is for the tweeter. Our input wire comes from down where the cup is located, down here at the bottom where the hole is. Now we're going to take this entire assembly and we're going to flip it over and mount it to the back, and then we'll be just about done. We've got to put a bottom on it yet, and a top and a base, and then we'll talk a little bit about finishing it. Okay, we're going to put the back on, and what I'm doing here, I'm using this Loctite construction cement. This is water-based stuff. It dries fairly fast, but you have enough time that you can work with it. And the reason we're using this, because we can't get inside with a caulking gun to seal the cracks up. But this will actually act as a good seal once we get the back nailed on, and we don't have to worry about caulking the inside. So now what we'll do is we'll take the back, we've already pre-wired, and we'll set it very carefully on the sides. And what we want to do this side first over here first, and we've got this pre-drilled, and then we'll fix this area where it's kind of pooched out here just a little bit. We'll spring that in and nail it on the other side. All right, we flipped our unit over after we've put the back on. It's secure now. I wanted to show you the crossover network in here where I said it would be located exactly behind the lower woofer here. And we have one more step we have to take. You notice I got some white material here. This is blanket material, polyester blanket material that you can get at your craft store. There's about an inch thickness of it here, long enough to cover behind the speakers. Now we have to do this because we want to prevent reflection of any mid-frequencies through the cones of the speakers. That'll cause us some distortion if we allow that to happen. So what we're going to do, we're going to cover up this area behind the speakers. Now I've already got this stapled at one end, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull it on down here and feed it through where the crossover network is located, and we'll staple that at the other end. And you can see how much we'll be covering behind the speakers with these. And we'll bring our wiring out and be ready to do our next step is to fill all these holes in here that we made when we set the nails. We'll fill those in with some filler, and we'll sand this thing thoroughly all over, and we'll be ready to complete the system. All right, we've got our top mounted and we've got our base put on. The only thing left to do now is to fill in all of the nail holes that we set, and then sand it very good all over, smooth it out, some rough places on there might be, and then we'll stain it the desired color we'd like to have. Now that we've finished our enclosure, it's time to install the speakers. First thing we're going to do is install the terminal cup that we'll connect the speakers to. This happens to be what we call a 5-way binding post type with some banana plug jacks, plus you can also put the wires under here and screw it down. Now I've already got my wires pulled through. Remember we pre-wired this, as you saw earlier, before we assembled the enclosure. We got our crossover network in and everything. Now this has a positive terminal, and this is a red wire, so the red wire will go right into the positive terminal. And then we have our green wire that we're using for our negative wire. Normally you'd use black, but I kind of had to use what I had in stock here. So the green works out pretty good. I got a spool of green wire I wanted to use up anyway. So we'll go ahead and get this bent around here. And I pre-tinned these wires a little bit so that they'd be easier to solder and get them into the terminals properly. Now one thing you'll notice around the bottom edge of the cup here is some foam insulation, strip insulation that you can get at your home center. I use this for both the speakers and for anything that may need a gasket. It makes a good gasket material. You want no air leaks whatsoever in your enclosure. We've got our wires attached. Now we're going to solder them on real quick. I always like to use a lot of solder on these. We don't want to have to go back and redo a cold solder joint. So there, now we've got our leads soldered on pretty tight. Now we're ready to insert this into the hole. It's a 3-inch hole that you use with this particular one. I'm going to use some 1/2-inch sheet metal type screws here for mounting this into the box. So we'll go ahead and screw these down. And then we're going to flip this over. Okay, we'll put our last screw in our terminal cup here. And then we'll be ready to install our drivers and see how this thing sounds. Now we're ready to install our drivers. Here's our 3 leads coming off of the crossover network. The yellow one is for the tweeter. The black one is the common for both of them, and the red one, of course, is for the woofers. Now we're using these neodymium woofers. That means the type of magnet. It's a very strong magnet. But these come equipped with their own foam gasket, so we don't have to use the foam gasket material on these. However, the tweeter does require a little strip of that foam gasket material. Now these two speakers will be wired in series because they are 4 ohm speakers, and we want an 8 ohm impedance out of this particular box to match our tweeter, which is an 8 ohm tweeter. So what we'll do is wire these two in series and then mount them on the cabinet, and we're done with the project. Alright, we're going to solder our last lead on here of our interconnected series drivers. And the next thing we'll do is flip them over and mount them in the cabinet. Now I want to show you what I've done here. The positive lead is going to the positive lead of this first speaker. The negative lead runs under here to the positive lead of the second speaker, effectively putting it in series. Then we have our negative lead connected to the other side, and our tweeters all connected up the same way. Now we're going to go ahead and flip these over and screw them in. We're going to use these little 1-inch drywall mounting screws. Goes nicely into the wood, hold them very solidly for us. Alright, now that we've got our speakers mounted, we want to make one more test before we fire them up with an amplifier. I have here my handy dandy phase tester. It's important that the speakers, when they operate in the same direction together, in and out, this way. If one operates the opposite direction, we're going to get bass cancellation. So what I did, I took a flashlight battery, mounted it in this plastic bottle I happen to have around here, and added some test leads to it. And this gives me a positive and a negative signal that I can apply to the speaker terminals. Now I've got my terminals plugged in down here with a pair of leads, and we're going to connect up the tester to them, and let's see which way the speaker cones go. If you watch the speaker cones very carefully, you notice how they're moving forward when I hit the positive lead on the positive lead of the speaker. So this tells us that our speakers are in phase, and they're going to work very well together. So I suggest you get yourself a standard flashlight battery and solder some leads on it. It's a handy tester to have for any speakers you might have around the house to make sure that they're operating in proper phase.